Welcome to our second edition of WSO Live. We are so excited to be able to do this for our community, providing art education for our WSO members around the state and providing membership value for the membership dollar. That's been real important to us, increasing the visibility of WSO and trying to get some new member recruitment going on. This is really exciting for a lot of us. We are a volunteer-led organization, and so we love to have folks offer to help us out. And if you're interested, Debbie will be talking about that in a few minutes. There will be a video link to the recording, and there is a Q&A box on your screen that will be monitored. And you can type your question in there, and I will be watching that and asking Renee as appropriate. She's really willing to be interrupted, so that'll be good. This is a one-way webinar, and we don't have the capacity to address individual tech issues. So everyone will be muted, but you'll be able to view this now and then, of course, receive the link once it's been edited, and you'll get an email to that effect at that point. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our WSO president, Debbie Lloyd, who has a few words for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about WSO. It's a great organization, and we exist to promote interest and appreciation for water media. We've been around for 60 years. We focus on member exhibitions and education. We have a lot of education pieces, and one of them is the online demo. But we have 2 conventions a year, each with a nationally known juror. And that includes an exhibition of art by our members. It includes classes, a juror demo, and after the convention is over, usually a 3 to 4 to 5 day workshop that's separate from the convention, but is also a great opportunity. We also have a lot of fun when we get together for our conventions. And besides the live demo, we have critique groups, which are small groups where you can share your paintings with others and you get feedback on what would improve your painting and what, just see what people are doing and learn some things about art. We also have DVDs that are free to rent. So we have lots of educational type things. And of course, the best thing that we have is that we are an organization of volunteers. And so as you volunteer for things in WSO, you will find that you just gain immensely. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Debbie. We appreciate you. And myself. So here we go. René Eisenbart has graciously agreed to do a demo for us, and we're so grateful. She is known for her expressive portraits and nature-inspired work. She's award-winning as an artist, and she approaches blends of classical technique with bold experimentation using acrylic, marbling, and textural mediums. Her work invites viewers into a world of possibilities, leaving space for personal interpretation. Her demo promises to offer some insight into her processes, and we couldn't be more thrilled to invite her and are grateful for her generosity today. So I will introduce here Ms. René Eisenbart.
Thank you, Catherine. It's delightful to be here with you all, and I love WSO. It's such a great organization, so it's my pleasure to support back. So today I'm going to be painting a rooster, which is a lively and fun subject. So I will show you a couple of paintings that I have done previously. The painting on the left is the Kauai Vibe rooster. It actually happened in quite a number of steps because I started painting it while I was demoing in Kauai, and then brought it home, kept working on it, and marbled it, and then added texture over the top of that, and then painted more into the texture. So the one on the right was also a demo started in Kauai, and it was the paper that I worked on had already texture put on it, at the time, I had no idea what I would be painting on it, and rooster seemed like a lovely subject, so it just happened. And yeah, so I've all of the things that I've done inform what I will do next. So when I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next, here's the reference that I snapped this photo when I was visiting my relatives in Maui, and then the little image is a color study. The image on the drawing is one that I drew when I was teaching in Florida, and I was thinking maybe I'll get to demoing that. Never had a chance. So that means I can do that for you today. Let's talk a little bit about drawing because drawing, it's a fun practice. And when I say practice, I think that's a good word for it because it takes practice. And drawing, sometimes when I draw, it just flows and comes naturally. Other times it just doesn't. So the drawing that's directly below my picture is kind of a funny one. And I mean, I knew it just looked funny when I did it, but I did it really fast, and I was under a bit of pressure. It's never a good idea to draw under pressure. It's great when I feel relaxed. The next drawing, the square one, I took my time. I had already done the larger drawing on a sheet of paper, but I wanted to do a little version that I could do for a quick demo. So here is the painting that I did. I actually scrunched up the reference into a square so that it would be easier to work from. And then I painted this version of it. So I want to talk a little bit about texture and about surfaces. I like working on panels. This is a panel made by American Easel. And I put texture on top of the surface. It's a little hard to see that, but you can kind of see if I hold it up, I think that it has some texture on the surface. This is a little easier to see because I have texture twice. And it's a little bit like what I'm showing you that I have prepared for the rooster painting, in that I've put gesso texture on it. And then over that, I've painted a ground for watercolor, which adds another level of texture. Something like that paints up something like this. So you can see the paint falls into the little grooves and creates its own texture when you put the paint on. Let's see, what else do I have here for you? Here, I'll pull these other things off. This is the one that I demoed for NWWS last month. It's the Trillium painting. That was a lot of fun to do, again, on textured paper. Here's an example of adding gesso onto it. Basically, this is a reject painting. So I never throw anything away. Anything that I have can be repurposed. And this is an example. Over this, I will put ground for watercolor because this is just the gesso. And watercolor, you can paint on gesso, but it's a little more like painting on Yupo. Is one of the early paintings that I made, putting texture on paper, then marbling it. And when I marbled it, I could kind of see this pattern. And then I added more gesso to create the eye shapes and a little bit of the fin shapes. And yeah, it's a fun, not as fussy, not as precise as a lot of the work that I do. And for me, it's a good way to bring out the looseness and expressiveness in my work. So here's the drawing of the rooster, and this already has texture on it, as you can see. Now I'm going to show you a little video of how I made that happen. The first thing I like to do when I'm working on watercolor paper is to apply gesso on the back. You can use any kind of gesso, regular gesso, and I apply it just with a paintbrush. This is a Simmons Simply Simple or something like that, one stroke paintbrush. And you just want to basically cover the whole thing. That's all there is to it. But when you put gesso on the back of your watercolor paper, it makes it sturdier. It's less likely to buckle. So then I apply Utrecht gesso on the top. Utrecht professional gesso is very thick. In fact, when you turn the container upside down, it does not pour out. You can see it's different than regular gesso. So I apply it either with a palette knife, or sometimes I'll use a credit card cut on a diagonal to apply it, or I will also sometimes use plastic or even a piece of paper that has gesso on it, and then you can spread it around. So you'll kind of see how I do that. You want to make marks that kind of go in line with your drawing. It doesn't matter if you cover up some of the drawing, because the texture itself will indicate the shapes that you drew originally. So when I make shapes with the palette knife, I'm aiming to create variety. And then in the variety, I also like to have basically to vary it up a little bit, so that so consistency, repetition, and then variety, so that every shape is a little bit different than every shape that I made previously. You don't have to be fussy about this. So when you put the gesso on there and then it dries and then you paint over it, the gesso gives the paint a shape to slip over, and so it already creates an interest that it wouldn't have if you were just painting on flat paper. As you're applying the gesso, think in terms of putting a little everywhere, not just on the subject, but you want it both on the subject and the background. A lot of times I'll start obscuring some of the lines, and it's okay. You don't really have to see all your pencil lines. I photograph my drawings so that if I want to refer back, I'll have a version of the drawing that I can look at. Now, drying time, so the application takes a few minutes, but not too long. As you can see, it's coming right along, just putting a little bit everywhere. The drying time kind of depends on how thick you make your application. So if you make it really thick, it's gonna take a few hours at minimum before it's dry. And I usually plan on doing this one day and then painting on it the next day. So for this one, I did the texture yesterday, and so that I can paint on it today. So one of the last things, I'm going to put a little bit of texture in the crest of the bird. I'm going to put a little texture in the pin feathers, and then it's also fun to. The last thing I'll do is put a little texture in the beak. What you want is enough texture everywhere so that it's not just on your subject. There goes the beak. So after this dries, the third step in the process that we'll show you in a minute is adding ground for watercolor. And that goes pretty fast. So I'll start talking about it now a little bit. But the ground I use I make it myself from Nova Color products. Nova Color is a paint company that doesn't sell at the paint stores. They sell mediums, but they also sell great acrylic paints. So I mix equal parts of texture paste, gesso, and matte medium into a solution, and then I paint that on. I'll thin it down with water so that it will be semi-opaque, semi-transparent, and you'll see some of the pencil showing through. So here I am painting that on. The basic trick is you want to make sure that you've covered every square inch, because if you haven't, if you leave places uncoated, then you'll see the difference where the paint soaks into those areas more deeply than where you have the ground applied. Ground is basically a way of supersizing your paper. It's a way of evening out the surface so that the paint will stick a little bit to the gesso and it won't stick as much to the paper. So it all becomes a little more even. So you apply the ground and then you basically just go let it dry again. This will take a couple hours for the drawing. I did it earlier today, so it's ready to go now. So I'm going to skip ahead to this version, which is the painting and the palette that I'm using. I use M. Graham paints because I like how wet they are and they stay wet in the palette, which is for me works really, really well. This is just a very small 16 well palette. And if you want to see the actual pigments that I use, the ones that I don't talk about, you can download that off the WSO website. And while you're on the WSO website, if you're not already a member, you might just want to join up. It is such a great group to belong to, lots of benefits. So, where to begin? In painting, there's always a million decisions that you make, and none of them are wrong. Every time I paint, I do it a little bit differently. So, let's see how I'm going to do it today. I think I'll start on the background. Oftentimes, I'll do the foreground first, but sometimes it's just nice to get some paint on the paper quickly, and I'm going to do that in the background. Oh, I wanted to say that this palette is unusually clean. My palette never looks this clean, but I left the other one up in Washington when I demoed it for NWWS. So I made a new one. And so let's make it dirty really fast. Some of my favorite pigments are quinacridone rust, and I'll throw some of that in here. Let's see, I'm going to throw in, so the pigments that I'll be using in my painting, I'll be using phthalo green, which is a really strong pigment, but also a really incredible one. A little quin gold, can never go wrong with some quin gold. And for the background, I'm also going to use a few other pigments, like I'm going to use some yellow ochre. The fun thing about yellow ochre is the pigment itself is heavy. The particles are heavier and they kind of settle down into the paper. It's interesting what happens when you mix colors and with some pigments that will shoot across the paper like the phthalo green, and sometimes they push other pigments out of the way. It's fun to notice the differences of what happens. Now here, where you can see the gesso texture in the background, there are places where the paint doesn't want to settle on it quite as easily. And that's kind of fun. And you can also see how the paint is breaking up into, let's see if I can pick this up and so you can see it a little more closely. It breaks into patterns as it flows over the surface. And that's what I love. That just kind of gets me excited. Anything is possible. The other thing I love about a treated surface like this is that if any time I don't like something, I can absolutely wipe it away. I don't do that a lot, really. In fact, my favorite thing is to leave lots of puddles. I'm going to go in for a little cerulean blue here to create a little blue into the background. I love making puddles and then just leaving them to dry because you don't know what will happen until after they dry. If you take them away, that possibility is gone. So I like just creating puddles, letting it dry, seeing what happens. And if you need to fix something, then fix it later. This is cobalt teal, another favorite pigment. Just does fun things. So yeah, I can paint around the crest a little bit, and it's just going to flow in here. And even though I like making huge puddles, very, very wet puddles, I'm going to try not to make it too wet because it will take a long time to dry this time. I do have some tricks for drying faster. Sometimes I will use a radiator and put the painting on that, or I'll use a little craft gun to make drying easier. Okay, let's go for a little more of this ochre and let's darken it up with cream gold. I also have another palette well right here with what I call my black mix. And it's a purpley black. It's not really a true black because that's the way I like to mix it. It's made of 4 parts ultramarine blue, 2 parts alizarin crimson, and actually probably a little less than 2 parts alizarin crimson, and less than 2 parts of gamboge. And it just makes a lovely dark that is somewhat liftable as darks go. Okay, let's just move a little bit of this around. Sometimes as my painting dries, I'll prop a paintbrush under one edge so that the paint runs a specific direction or lift the edge a little bit. Mm. So I can see from my color reference that you can see in the little picture that there are some darks underneath the body. And I'm going to try and the color reference is having a color reference is really handy because it kind of tells you where you might be going. It's sometimes challenging to especially when you're working to interpret your reference, which I like to do instead of just replicating the reference, I really enjoy the interpretation part. That's where you make a painting your own instead of just painting a photograph. So when you're interpreting, though, that's where you go, okay, so many decisions to make. And if you do a little color study, even if you don't follow it precisely, it gives you a rough to go by that it gives you a concept to go by that will help you in making those decisions. Or you can look at your color study and you can go, well, I don't want to make it like that. The other option. So because I have some of the dark mix at the bottom, I want to put some of that up at the top too, so that the color flows through and it doesn't just look heavy on the bottom.
Hey, Renee, is this a good time to
Oh, yes,
interrupt?
please. I was just thinking it's so quiet.
So we have a question. Someone's asking that you repeat the recipe for the watercolor ground.
Okay. For the watercolor ground, the way I make it is equal parts of matte medium, gesso, and texture paste. Those are the 3 Nova Color products that I use to make the ground. Now, I've made ground with other products as well, and I'm not going to say that it doesn't work because at one point I started just trying out different recipes just to see what would happen. What will happen if I mix this? And what would happen if I mix that? So I mixed 3 different concoctions using acrylic mediums, all of them including some kind of gesso. And they all worked. I painted on all 3 of them. I liked all 3 of them. So I just kind of settled on this recipe because I like it and it uses Nova products. I like the Nova products partly because they're really high quality and partly because they're inexpensive. It's great because you can make your own ground for kind of a fraction of the cost that you would buy ready-made ground. And I like ready-made ground perfectly fine. So I have nothing against either Daniel Smith ground or the golden grounds, the prepared grounds. They're all good products. It's just nice to be able to mix your own because that way you can have it exactly the way you like it. It might take a little experimenting, but so nothing I like to do as I'm painting is bring the paint right into the subject instead of always having this line between the subject and the background. Don't do it. I don't do it everywhere, but there are if I can find some places in any painting where I can do that, it's just a good strategy.
Here's another question, Renee, about using gesso around the outline of your subject. Is that easier than using Frisket to keep certain areas separate?
Okay, that's a very good question because I really wouldn't advocate putting gesso around the outline of the subject. What I try to do is move the gesso back and forth so that you can't really tell where the subject begins and the subject ends just by looking at the gesso texture. So if I wanted to mask, I would use Frisket, but I don't mask, and the reason is because you don't really need to when you are working with a surface where the paint is pretty liftable. If the paint won't lift just with a paintbrush, a lifting brush, I will use the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, just a little bit of that, and it will take all of the paint away. And I was asked once recently at a little workshop that I did, I think it was one for WSO, if the Magic Eraser really was not good for a piece of art in terms of it being archival. And in fact, I looked it up and it doesn't have any bleach in it. What it has is like these tiny molecular scrubbing particles. And so it's actually sort of like a scrubber, but just a really good scrubber. So don't be concerned about using that on your fine art paintings. Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. I like to feel like I have an audience out there. So it's very quiet. And so thank you for asking questions.
You absolutely have an audience in excess of 80 people, so keep going.
Awesome. That's great. It's fun. So the last demo I did was for NWWS and I did it in Washington because I was traveling to Washington then. And today I'm working in my home studio, which is always wonderful to be in my home studio. So I'm delighted to bring you all in here because I teach classes here. And so I'm used to being here with an audience. But the audience is what makes live painting fun. So here I put in some fairly bright color, a blue and a gold. So what I'm going to do is introduce a little bit of rust into that to tone it down a little bit. So basically that'll de-intensify it. And so will the black mix, also another good way to de-intensify. So pure color has a lot of intensity if you go into pure paint color. And that's why I love the dirty palette because I can always find a place where the color is not so pure and has a lot of but you want your grays. The way I like to think about it is you want maybe 10% color diva and the other 90% you just want great neutrals, colorful neutrals. So you can see here, so it's starting to dry and it's creating some of its own texture where it's running back. I can make that exaggerate that a little bit by adding liquid back in. Sometimes, a lot of times that'll just disappear, but it'll change the color a little bit and it'll change the value of the color, darken up the value a little bit. We'll put some blues up in here. Greeny blues. Gray this up. So again, transitions. Because I've got gray back here, we're going to darken that a little bit and bring some of that over on this side. I'm going to bring some grays back in here. Okay, so this is sort of round one. It doesn't need to look like much yet. But there are things about it that I love. There are things about it that I may change, and there's lots of time to do that. The nice thing about working on a half sheet of paper is that it's a lot of real estate. So I can be letting parts of it dry while I'm painting other parts. So I'm going to switch brushes. I've been using a really big cat's tongue It's a connoisseur brush with, it's called an oval wash, is what they call it, but it's basically a cat's tongue style. And it's made of squirrel hair and Rizlon, which is the most absorbent, squirrel is the most absorbent natural fiber, and the Rizlon is a synthetic that helps it hold its shape. They also make a great dagger. This is the bigger one, and that's the one I'm going to use. It's the 1/2 inch. The dagger is fun because it holds a lot of material and it's the point will slip around and create lots of interesting texture, shape. So I'm mixing in here some phthalo green. I want to have some really vibrant phthalo green, and I can make, that's the fun thing about doing the rooster is that he can be very colorful. We'll put a little phthalo in here in the tail area.
Renee, I have a question about whether or not you're working on a flat and level surface.
I am. And here's the clue. See all these puddles? Some of which will stay and some of which will go. Um, if I were not working on a flat surface, that paint would just run off. It is that wet. So that's the clue that it's definitely a flat surface. I almost always do work on flat surfaces for that reason, because I love to make puddles, and the only way I can really do that successfully is to work on a flat surface. I'm gonna put some darks in here, really dark darks. In fact, it needs to be even darker than that. So my black mix that I was talking about, I mix it up in a um, little bottle, that a fine liner bottle that I can then just, I'm gonna put some in because what I had in my palette is too wet already. So I mix it up, but I keep it really thin enough so that it will run out. So I'll mix the pigments in the bottle directly, add enough water so that it will run out, but still thick enough to where when I apply it, it's really dark and heavy if it's in its full strength. And this is wet enough, it should start running together, which I think is really fun. Let's also add some quinacridone rust. So my philosophy that I try to hold when I paint is if it's kind of like if it happens, it's meant to be. And I don't, I can't always subscribe to that, but that is the mindset that I work to have when I paint. And it's just I think it's a good attitude to take, because you can always change anything later. But I avoid making too many edits at the early on at the outset of painting because I kind of want to see what happens if I leave it. And so I think of painting, of art making, as making lots of mistakes and then deciding which ones to keep because you can't keep them all. That never works. But a lot of times it is the mistakes that make your painting exciting, that make it unique. So I like to leave lots of room for mistake possibilities. This pigment is one of my favorites. It's a quinacridone red. So I'll be mixing that up with the quinacridone gold. I I think mixing is a lot of fun, mixing paint, and the best thing you can do for yourself as an artist is to be careful not to over mix. That if you're going to be careful about something, that's a really good thing to watch for because the more you mix, the more bland, the more ho-hum your painting becomes. And it's really easy to do that. It's really easy to mix the life out of a painting. So that's one thing I like to kind of watch for. This is a little quinacridone violet that mixes in nicely with pretty much all the other quinacridones. It'll be interesting mixing a little bit in here with gold. It'll create some grays as I do that, but it mixes nicely. Now this is still damp, but it's almost dry. And I have a feeling that I will be able to paint near it if I use thick paint. Let's see what happens. Some of this may bleed and run out. And if so, I'm going to let it do it for now. Okay. And we're going to let a little of this bleed too, if it wants to. But not here. I just won't touch that yet. Okay. One thing that I thought was interesting when I was doing the color study is that on the back, the paint just bled back into the background. And I kind of liked that. So I decided to leave it. And sometimes I do. I like here where the paint's bleeding out, it creates a softness that can be a good thing. So it's nice to leave some of that happening. Working on this surface, I don't really have to worry about creating hard edges that I can't fix later. In general, not creating hard edges where you don't want them is an easier way to paint, but I don't always have everything calculated in my mind where I want the hard edges and where I want the soft edges until afterwards. Sometimes I do, but more and more now. But I like this method of working because if I don't have all that worked out previously, then I can still fix it easily later on. So I'm going to start in here with the quinacridone red on the crest. And some of that may bleed in, we'll see. Checking this. Then another thing, so quinacridone red is a beautiful pigment. It is not as strong a red as some, but it's a little bit of a transparent red, which is part of its beauty. But for this crest, since we want it to be pretty red, I'll end up using another red to go over the top of this. This is pyrrole red, or sorry, quinacridone red is almost a pinky red, but it's not a blue red like quinacridone rose is. So it's a good choice for the crest. However, to get it to be fully red, I'm going to use some pyrrole red, which I don't even keep on my palette regularly, but I have some right here. And it'll be fire engine red. So whenever you're painting something and you need the red color, then just get out the pyrrole red. Okay, and then I think they call this the wattle, that part underneath the chin. We definitely want to get this spreading into the rest of the feathers a little bit. All right, back to the gold. We're going to do gold with some rust in it to create a nice sort of a yellowy gold. Notice how that dripped. I don't mind just seeing some drips because yeah, it's what happens when you work loose and fast. One thing I want to retain as I do this is I want to retain the highlight between along the neck of the rooster. So what I usually do is just kind of do some painting around. And again, I'm using that dagger, so it's doing a good job of moving the paint. And again, it's like that repetition with variation. And as long as I can maintain that kind of patterning, it looks usually fairly natural. And it doesn't have to be precise. I like that about patterning.
The gold and the red are mixing so beautifully on the paper.
They do that. And you notice it's starting to bleed out in places, which, that's just part of the fun of it. I'm going to turn this in a little bit because my paper is starting to get a little bit wonky because it's getting very wet. And I'll just prop something underneath it here to keep it running back a little bit. Okay. I want to go in with a little teal because I just think teal is such a great color. And the teal combines really well with the phthalo green. It kind of tones down the intensity of the phthalo. And if I want to add intensity, I can always run some phthalo over the top. And I'm going to go in with a little dioxazine violet here for this. Another great pigment. It's a little bit like my black mix in a way, but it's a little more, the deeper, more heavily pigmented. Because my black mix uses ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is one of the, it's a dark color, but it's one of the less strong pigments. It's a beautiful pigment and it granulates amazing. And it's one of my favorite paints, but um, sometimes dioxazine purple does some really fun things. So you can see how as I paint this, the brush is running over the top of the gesso. And it's really what you see is the paint settling between the shapes that the gesso makes, which I think is really fun to let it do that. And we'll just get in some more color. And over here, I want to have some paler colors. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move around a little bit of the red. If you put in one color someplace, it's nice to repeat that somewhere else. We'll throw a little gold into that. And I'm going to put in a little bit right in here to kind of echo that around. All righty. The body actually comes down here somewhere. There's kind of another feather shape, and then the body comes down here. And to show that, basically, I'm just going to imply that by putting in a little wet paint in here. And we'll run the leg down. So the legs, this leg is in front of the other leg, and I redrew it a little bit from the reference because it was hard to tell in the reference which leg was in front of the other. And because this one's in front, I'm going to keep it a little paler so that I can paint the rear leg a little darker, because in painting, this doesn't hold true in landscapes, but anything close up, any close up subject that you make, the things that are lighter come forward and the things that are darker recede. So you can always use that value information to basically create the illusion of depth. And so I try to subscribe to that whenever I can when I'm painting a close-up subject. This is really bled now quite a bit, which I think is just fine. This has two, so we'll see. If it's too much, if I think it's too much later, I can always change it. And but I'm not changing it now because it is too soon. I think I will get out the dryer though, and just dry this up a little bit. Or I could also find a smaller brush. I could also create a little bit more interest just by dipping some water down into the paint, and it moves it around again. This is already dry, so it's not really creating the same thing. But over here, I've created a textural movement by introducing some water. So you can see that even though my paper has gesso and matte medium on it, it still is, and it's 300-pound arches. It is still buckling a little bit. That's just the nature of paper. If you want a surface that doesn't buckle at all, use a palette. The wood cradle palettes made by American Easel are really wonderful surfaces to paint on. But on the other hand, sometimes I prefer using paper, and part of the reason is that there are art competitions that require it. The big ones typically require it, AWS, NWS. A lot of competitions now are opening up to palettes, to using palettes, like NWWS allows using palettes, wood palettes, and some of the others. So when I'm entering competitions, I look for what the rules are and look to see where I can use more interesting materials.
Quick question. Would you ever go back into a painting that you finished with another coat of gesso, say if you wanted additional texture someplace and then paint on top?
That's an excellent question. And yes, I do that. And I actually did that on the rooster painting that I showed earlier. I'll move back to the reference. This one on the left, because I had painted it. I'll have to look for the versions of this. I could post them on my blog or something, but that I have some of the different versions. And I had kind of finished painting it, marbled it, painted it some more, and I just wasn't happy with it. And I got out the gesso and started putting gesso tail feathers on, which really loosened it up and gave it a lot more character. So I am very much in favor of going back into paintings that you're not happy with. I have 2 or 3 paintings slated right now to get facelifts. And sometimes that's literally, sometimes that means taking the face off and putting on a different face. I love painting portraits, as many of you know. Those of you who know me know I love painting portraits. But I don't always get the face right. Sometimes it's because I don't have a good reference to begin with. Sometimes it's just because I didn't take the time, and it does take time. So there are tricks that you can do in that case. In what I do, if I want to go back into a painting where where I don't want to just cover up everything with white gesso, is I'll use another product that Daniel Smith makes called transparent ground for watercolor. I don't know if you can see this. Let me hold it up closer. Daniel Smith, transparent ground for watercolor, transparent watercolor ground specifically. And so it's an interesting product. It's not for the faint of heart. Exactly. Because when you put it on, it's like, putting an acrylic over the top of your painting. It is literally doing that. And it takes 24 to 48 hours to dry. So this is not a fast process. But if it's handled correctly, it does dry beautifully transparent, and it gives you the ability to paint over the top with watercolor. Oftentimes what I'll do if I'm covering something up is then I'll go in with either your white watercolor paint or a white gesso. And if it's a face, I'll give it a layer that is sort of like putting on a new foundation of makeup. I like to think of it like that. So I get the lights. Sometimes I'll even change the profile, completely change where the features sit. I've been known to do that. And you can recreate a painting, a face, and it's inevitably better the next time. But it does, for me, it requires layers of working. So I'll put on the transparent ground. I will paint over the top with the opaque paint, and then I'll add a little watercolor into that. And by the time it starts getting to where I can't add paint without lifting other paint off, that's where I stop. I varnish it again with the acrylic. This is a Daniel Smith, sorry, this is a golden product. It says right there, golden. It's a gloss archival varnish. They're MSA varnish, and it works really well for varnishing over watercolor paintings. So, so I will varnish it at that point and let that varnish dry, then add a new layer of the transparent watercolor ground, and just basically keep going like that. So then I can paint watercolor again, and sometimes I'll need to do that 3 times on a painting before I get the final effect the way I want it to be. But it's worth it. It's worth it if you end up with the effect you want. Typically, I'll do that when I'm working on a painting and there are some things that I love about it, but there are some other things that just aren't working for me, and I can just fix that and make it all work beautifully, brilliantly. Okay, so I'm going to lift some of this just because I want to show you how easy it is to lift. Ha 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 ha. Let's see if it lifts. Probably this will stain in a little bit, and so to completely lift it, I'll need to get out the magic eraser. But I want to see first what comes off just with normal scrubbing. And it's not like I need to remove it all. I just want to lighten it up a little bit. In fact, yeah, I'm almost removing more than I want here because I kind of want that that flow of color to happen. I like to keep cloths handy when I paint because I do sometimes have fun with lifting. And you can use a paper towel, but I just like natural cloths. I use them until they get really dirty and then I wash them. Okay, yeah, that probably took off more than I needed even. And I kind of like the way that looks. So I'm leaving it like that. But what I'm going to do now, I could have taken it all off if I had used the magic eraser. But what I'm going to do now is add some Pyrrole Red. This is another dagger brush, but this one is silver black velvet that is so well loved that it doesn't say anything anymore. It's the black velvet silver, no, I don't know. Anyway, it's, let's see, I have another one, I think, someplace. It's the same brand as this. It's the silver black velvet brush. Yes, it's an odd silver black. But it's also a squirrel that's very absorbent. This one's a little smaller, and so I love it for doing detail. I used to use Series Sable, Winsor Newton Series Sable brushes, Series 7 Sable brushes, but they are so expensive and they just don't hold up the way the squirrel hair and the Rizlan holds up. So I go for that. So now what I'm going to do is put a little Pyrrole Red on my palette, and I'll just put that right here. And that is Fire Engine Red. And it goes on thick and it's much more opaque than the quinacridone red. I love the quinacridone red, but sometimes you just want a really thick, opaque, fire engine red, like in this case. So this will do the trick. Ta-da! And I'm going to leave the quin red showing through here in the middle because I want to have that sort of reflective quality showing where the crest is reflecting light. Okay, we're going to put some dark red in through here. May also get some other color. And we're going to put some dark red down in the wattle. They always say that when you get the eye in, then your subject has life. So I'm going to do that. I'm throw in a little water in here to spread out that paint. Okay. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to give it kind of a blue-green. The wonderful thing about a dirty palette is you can always find a place that has the right color in your palette. So we're going to go with a little more.
Jane is commenting that this is wonderful, and she's also a huge fan of your portraiture. Do you plan to do any demos of a portrait?
Well, I hope so. That would be fun. Um, and I'm also thinking in terms of doing a portrait class. I've been asked, and I'm going to see if I can find dates for 2026 yet, which would be great fun to do. Probably sometime in the late fall or early winter. We'll see what I can do. So thank you for asking. Email me and tell me you're more interested in portraits, and we'll see what I can make happen. Because I mean, Tess started this wonderful process and she did a fantastic portrait. So I thought, yeah, I should do the portrait of the rooster just to change it up a little bit. So that's the base for the eye. It's going to need a lot more than that, but it's a good start. I tend to work in layers no matter what I'm painting. I use basically the same processes for any kind of subject. So the same sort of techniques that I'm using in my rooster will be the techniques that I'm using in portraits. But there are different aspects that when you start working with portraits specifically, you kind of like study features, and there are different tricks that work for portraits that you don't necessarily use when you're doing a rooster face. So yeah, it's fun to study portraits. I feel like I'm always studying composition and I'm always studying how to make a better portrait. This is the beak, and I just want to get a little color in there. And I used some azo orange. I dipped into the azo orange a little bit of yellow ochre and probably a little quin gold. So those three pigments are really good for that. And because I added some gesso to the beak, there's it right away, it's showing some texture where the paint is settling in. And I think I'll just let that be for the moment, um, and move this around here just for fun. That'll get darker later, but I just felt like doing that. Okay. Now go into the Quin Gold, and there's still a little. This kind of layering the color really intensifies it. And of course, color always looks brighter when it's wet. And that's one of the beautiful things about using the varnish. It's also one of the beautiful things about using, let me just hit cancel on this there, about using the texture, the gesso texture and the acrylic on the watercolor paper before I put the paint down, is that it creates a surface that causes the paint to sit on top instead of absorbing into the paper. And when the paint sits on top, it creates a more vibrancy because the light doesn't have to penetrate the paper to hit the color. It hits the color right off and then bounces back at you. Whereas with the paint soaking into the surface, what happens is it has to soak in then for the light to bounce off of it. So the light penetrates the surface then to bounce off of the color. Then when you apply varnish to the painting, it gets really bright again, more like it is when it's wet. And I really like that kind of vibrancy when it happens. Okay. Yep, this is starting to get fun. Let's throw some darks into this space. This is one of those places where it's just going to need to go dark because it's sort of the background. And then these other feathers come up over the top and they can be lots lighter. Let's see. I'm getting a little early to do this, but it just changes up the character of it so much. And the trick is when you're adding the detail like this, I should be using a floppier brush. That's one of the tricks. I'm going to try this brush. It was given to me, so I'm not familiar even with where to buy it, but it is called a CJ's Scroggy Loose Goose. As close as I can tell. It's it's like a dagger, but it's extra long. So what it will do is it'll move around the paint nicely as I brush. So the idea is use your arm to sweep and move so that what you want to do is create shapes that are unique so that it's a little bit repetitive, but also you get just unique shapes. So we'll throw one in here, or three. And it just creates this sort of looseness that can happen. It's nice to do that with hair too when you're painting a portrait. And it's fun. Sometimes, sometimes I think the important thing in terms of creating good painting strategy is you got to find what's fun and do that. because that is sustaining. All right. Once more quinacridone red in through here. And more yellow and rust. The thing about the dagger brush is you have less control, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Too much control can be useful or not. Now, because I painted right over the body, when I add this new paint, new layer of paint, it still gives you a little bit of an edge, but it integrates much nicer than if I had painted up to the edge on one side and then painted down to the edge on the other. I really like how that integration works. Here, where I have a more clear edge, you'll see that coming through. And I'm good with that. That's a good place for an edge up here. But down here, I just wanted it to kind of flow together a little bit more. All right, let's get some legs in there. So the azo orange itself is very bright. So I'm going to mix it in with a little green and mute that back for the legs. And I'm going to start with this forward leg. And then I'm going to come in here for the back one. And actually, I'm going to go in with a little rust and darken this back one up because it is dark. I want it to be darker so that it recedes. I'll also mix in some green and just sort of dip that in. It'll bleed on in there, but I think that's going to work out okay. If I painted this rooster 10 times, it would look different every time because I'm not a formulaic painter really. I just prefer, I take clues from what I've done before, but I prefer just playing and seeing what happens and recreating it differently instead of trying to reproduce it exactly like it was before. It's just more fun for me. Okay. Now let's see what we can do with this beak. I want to really lighten it up a little bit, so I'm going to take some yellow ochre and put that in, and then maybe lift a little bit. Gives me a sense of it. In the eye, the gold that I put in here and some of the red just sort of bled down into the eye, and I kind of like that. So I'm going to leave that, and when it's dry, I can add darks around it. I think I will allow it to dry right now so that I can add the darks. I'm going to pull this up because the beak's getting too big. I like the aqua, the teal, the cobalt teal. And you can really see how the patterning is happening as it slips over that gesso. So we've got a lot of the pale tones in, we've got a lot of the mid tones in, and a few darks, but not too many darks yet. And she's going to still need some more darks before it's going to work correctly. So I can put in some darks right now, even while I'm drawing this. Let's throw, oh, I like that color. And if I painted the same thing 10 times, there would be things that I would like best about all 10 paintings. That's just kind of the way it is. I'm going to switch out brushes because we'll reserve the dagger for something that doesn't require any control. This is probably my favorite brush. It's another oval wash, but it's a smaller one. It's the 1/2-inch connoisseur brush. And it has enough of a point that I can get some detail. Not as much, probably not as good of a point probably as when it was brand new, but I've used this one a long time and it still works. And it moves a lot of material and I have a fair amount of control with it, which sometimes control is good. Okay, come in here with some Quin Rust. That's quite a bit of Quin Rust. But I think that can work. And I'm just going to kind of paint around some of these feathers. Okay. The blue. Yep, starting to look like something. I think it needs a little splash. So this brush will probably work pretty well for that. I'm going to give it a little splash. Give it a little lighter. Let's give it. Another thing that can be fun while you're doing the background on this surface is you get a puddle going. If it's not too big of a puddle, as it's starting to dry, spray in with water and it does really wonderful things sometimes. Okay, I'm just going to add water itself now. Create another puddle. Got to give the chicken something to scratch. Okay. See if I can get some big drops. Okay. I like that. All right. One thing I'm going to do here is a little lifting. So my typical way of lifting is you kind of have your scrubber brush. This is a number 10 Zen brush, and then a cloth so that I can wipe it off. I dip in the water. I come in here and I can kind of lift into the paint because I want this feather to be white or lighter in value so that it shows up. I'm gonna lift this one a little bit. There.
Joy is saying that
Sorry.
Joy is saying that she finds the various mediums that are available now confusing and wonders if you've ever done a class on using different types of mediums and what they all do.
Yeah, I've done a few WSO breakout sessions on using different mediums. And when I teach classes here in the studio, I'm using a lot of different mediums. And so my students sometimes start using mediums, although not always. Some do, and some prefer just painting more traditionally. And it's all good. There's no right or wrong way to approach this. But it takes, so here's what I recommend, Joy. Um, just get yourself a medium. Think about what the possibilities are for using it, and then just try it on something. Maybe something that's not terribly important, so that it's a no fail proposition. You can just try it, see what happens, just as an experiment, and have some fun with it. And then keep track of what happens when you try it. That's really a wonderful way to learn, whether you do that in a classroom situation or in a workshop someplace. Oftentimes I will, I'll take a workshop just so that, I have a set time to paint and then bring all the things that I want to experiment with and just do that. Maybe along with what's going on in the workshop, maybe not so much. But it's you there are mediums that I've had that sit on the shelf for a while. Like I remember I took a workshop from Robbie Laird and she introduced me to the tar gel. So it sat on the shelf for a while because I bought some, of course. And then one day I started working on this project. It was a nest, and I thought, well, this would be a really good place to use the tar gel. So I just got it out and started experimenting. And as soon as I did that, I'm discovering, oh, but it also works really well for doing this bird where I want a tree in the background and I can use it for the branches. I'm going to use the water to soften up some of these drops a little bit. So pretty soon you just like find all the possibilities and but you have to start somewhere. That's the trick is just make an excuse for trying a product and then see what happens when you try it because it's fun.
Thanks, Renee. Another question
Yeah.
about how your varnishing process works. Do you use
Mhm.
multiple coats?
Yeah, I do. Now, here's the trick about varnishing. And when I'm talking about varnishing, I'm talking about this golden product, the archival varnish. It's a wonderful product. I use it exclusively. I don't use Krylon because Krylon every now and then comes out opaque, and that's not a good thing over a transparent painting. So this product never ever fails. It's made very carefully, and that's why it costs a little bit more, but it's worth it just because it's your art project. So when you put on coats of that, if you're working on a watercolor painting that is untreated, so there's no gesso underneath it, it takes sometimes up to 7 coats to make it all seal. And that's the trick. You want to put enough varnish on there so that you can put water on top and it'll just like you can just flick it away. One of the first times I used the varnish, I was using it on aquaboard, which is not a surface I use anymore because it's so fragile. But I used it on aquaboard and I varnished it and I left it sitting out on the deck rail and it rained. And so I I thought, oh no. But in reality, had very quickly sealed. And so the water just, I could wipe it away with a towel. And that's the goal because after that, I varnished with another layer. I still use the golden top coat, but because that's not available anymore, Color makes a varnish that they consider useful as a final top coat. And this one is a matte varnish. I wouldn't use just a pure matte varnish because it too much. You could technically use a matte varnish if it's the last layer that you use and it's not too thick. The way it works is you can put as many layers of gloss varnish, any kind of gloss varnish, on a painting and it won't obscure it. But if you put multiple layers of matte varnish on, it will obscure it. But I like to have a little, I don't want it too shiny typically unless I'm using gold or fluorescence or something. So I will use a satin or something that's semi-gloss on the top coat. So multiple layers. Now, getting back to where I started, if I'm painting on the surface that I usually work on, which has some acrylic under the watercolor paint, it seals very, very quickly. I can seal it with one or two coats of varnish, of the spray varnish, and it's all sealed to where I can paint gel on top and it won't hurt it. So, and that would be this gel, the transparent watercolor ground. All of these products are water-based, and so it's like painting water on top of your watercolor painting, and you know typically that will lift the paint. So this is the product that keeps the paint from lifting, and depending on whether you have acrylic under it, because acrylic bonds to acrylic. So if there's acrylic under the paint and then you spray it with this, it bonds very quickly to a seal. Now, when I say a coat, this is what I'm talking about. I go sprays, and then I go zzz, the other direction. Two things, you want to shake this really well. It has a little marble in it before you use it. The second more important thing is use it outside. This is not a product to be used indoors. Use it outside. Wear a face mask. It is, if you can smell it, that means that you can breathe it, and this is not, this is very toxic. So it's a beautiful product. I use it because there's nothing else that works better, but be careful with it. It's definitely a more toxic product than.
Renee,
uh,
we're right at 8:26, so we just have a couple more minutes. I'm gonna just encourage people to look for an email with your finished painting on it and the link to the video. Actually, the finished painting will show up on the website, and then I'll
Great.
let you finish off here the last couple of minutes.
Okay, great. We'll just try to add a few details because you know the details are what makes a painting pop. Thank you for the heads up about the time. And yeah, this has been really fun. And I look forward to finishing it. I'm thinking what I might try to do is, and we'll see how this goes, but I may try to do a little video of the finish of it so that it can, so that besides seeing the finished product, you can kind of watch how it's happening a little bit.
That would be fantastic.
Fun to do. We'll see. It may take a while too. No promises. But I'll do what I can. I'm right now planning a family reunion trip to Portugal, which I'm excited about. Fairly, we leave in the 8th of August, I believe, so right around the corner. Let's see. So I'm gonna rein in the beak a little bit with this dark edge. That's the intention anyway. We'll see if that works. Got the top of the beak. It's going to still need a little more dark color. The iris, the eye is a little too round and perfect right now. Perfect is often not your friend in art making. It's almost like um, the more roughness, the more idiosyncrasies, the more uniqueness, the better it works out. So I'm going to work to take a little more of the perfection out of this. Although I've been doing a pretty good job, there's a lot of roughness already in there. But some things will still change. I'm going to run a little more of this gold, and Catherine, stop me when it's time. And or I'm happy for questions anytime. We'll just mix a little azo orange in here. I wanted to mention that if you are interested in hearing more about classes and workshops or webinars coming up, I tend to post on my MailChimp e-blasts. And on my website, which I'm sure there's a link to on the WSO website, you can go to my website, and right on the website, there's a place where you can subscribe to my MailChimp e-blasts. There's a button. Hit the subscribe button, fill out your information, and you'll get them automatically. I recommend
We're
that.
seeing some wonderful comments. Renee is delightful. Thank you so much, Renee. This has been wonderful to watch you paint and learn so much about your process. So
Thank you.
thanks, everyone. Thanks for attending, and we're right at the 8:30 mark.
Okay, are we going to do any Q&A?
Just been
Doing that.
interrupting you every time there was a question, so we're
Perfect.
good. Yeah.
Perfect. Let me come back to this. Perfect. It's just been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for setting this up for me, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.